Every man thinks a relationship will bring him peace, support, and happiness. But what if I told you, for most men, it becomes the very reason they lose their time, their money, and their energy? You see, relationships today are not always about love. They often turn into a cycle of demands, expectations, and sacrifices, and without even realizing it, a man wakes up one day drained, wondering where his focus, his drive, and his strength disappeared. Number 1, time investment without return. When a man enters a relationship, he often does so with sincerity and seriousness. He invests his time not just in being physically present, but in being emotionally available, giving attention to every little detail, listening to her stories, understanding her moods, and making sure she feels heard and valued. Hours that could have been spent on his growth, his work, or even simply recharging himself are redirected into maintaining the connection. At first, this feels natural because he believes relationships thrive on consistent effort and attention, but over time he begins to notice that the balance is missing. He is putting in more than what is coming back, and the energy he pours out is not being reciprocated in equal measure. The problem lies in how relationships today often encourage men to be the ones who give endlessly while the return they receive becomes conditional or minimal. A man will rearrange his schedule, stay up late for calls, cancel important tasks, or even put his own priorities on hold because he feels the need to make the relationship his first concern. In many cases, he does all this in the hope of being appreciated, but instead he is met with a sense of entitlement from the other side. What he gives is not seen as sacrifice, it is expected, and the more he gives, the less it seems to be valued. This creates a silent cycle where his time is constantly consumed, yet the recognition or effort he deserves never arrives. Time is one of the most precious resources a man has because it is directly tied to his growth, his opportunities, and his achievements. When he allows a relationship to occupy endless hours of his day without receiving encouragement, respect, or support in return, he is not just losing minutes on a clock. He is losing the chance to move closer to his goals. Every moment he spends solving problems that should not exist or calming emotions that should be self-managed is a moment taken away from his own progress. This is where the imbalance becomes destructive because a man begins to see that his time is not building him, it is being drained by someone else's demands. Over time, this imbalance erodes his sense of fulfillment. He realizes that he is always the one initiating conversations, always the one planning the meetups, always the one putting effort to keep things alive. It becomes clear that the relationship exists because of his input alone, and if he were to stop giving, it would collapse instantly. This one-sided nature is the harsh reality of time investment without return. It feels like pouring water into a cup with a hole at the bottom. No matter how much he gives, it never fills, and instead of nourishing him or the relationship, it leaves him empty and frustrated. Number 2, financial burden disguised as love. From the very beginning, society conditions men to believe that love must be proven through spending. A man is told that if he truly cares, he will pay for the dinner, buy the flowers, plan the dates, and eventually shoulder the larger financial responsibilities of the relationship. What looks innocent in the beginning, like paying for coffee or gifting a piece of jewelry, slowly becomes an unspoken rule where his financial contributions are the backbone of the connection. This pressure is not always directly demanded, but it is deeply implied, and a man quickly learns that his value in the relationship is measured by how much he can provide materially rather than how much he can contribute emotionally. Over time, this dynamic creates a lopsided balance where love is confused with money. Many women are conditioned to see being spoiled or treated as a form of affection, and men, wanting to prove their worth, fall into the trap of constantly giving without questioning the cost to themselves. Dates, holidays, birthdays, anniversaries, and even random gestures of affection all require him to spend, while she learns to expect more and more. The cycle is cleverly disguised as romance, but in reality it becomes a financial obligation that drains his resources faster than he realizes. Love transforms into a system of transactions where a man's generosity is taken for granted and his sacrifices are overlooked. The danger in this disguised burden is that men rarely notice the drain until it is too late. He starts to see his bank account shrinking, his savings stalling, and his long-term financial goals getting delayed, but he convinces himself that it is normal because this is what men do. Instead of channeling his money into investments, education, or business opportunities that could build his future, he spends it on temporary moments meant to keep the relationship alive. What makes it worse is the lack of gratitude that often follows. Instead of being seen as meaningful sacrifices, his financial efforts become routine expectations, and once they are normalized, they lose their value. As the relationship progresses, the demands grow heavier. It is not just about dinners and small gifts anymore. It becomes about vacations, bigger presents, and even lifestyle upgrades. The man starts carrying the weight of maintaining a standard that keeps her interested, but this standard often comes at the expense of his own stability. Many men reach a point where they are working harder and harder just to fund a relationship that no longer feels like love, but like a never-ending financial responsibility. The more he gives, the less it feels like a choice, and the more it feels like a duty. The beauty of genuine connection disappears, replaced by the stress of constantly having to prove himself through material means. Number 3, emotional energy leakage. When a man enters a relationship, he doesn't just give his time and money, he gives something far more valuable, his emotional energy. He listens when she vents about her problems. He calms her down when she's upset. He reassures her when she is insecure. And he tries to solve issues that may not even be his responsibility. At first, this feels like the natural role of being supportive, but over time, it begins to chip away at his inner strength. Every word of comfort, every moment of patience, every effort to carry her emotional weight drains his mental reserves until he finds himself tired, not physically, but emotionally. He wakes up already feeling like he has been carrying a burden he cannot put down, and this invisible exhaustion affects every part of his life. The issue with emotional energy is that it is not infinite. A man has a limited amount of focus, patience, and resilience to give each day. When most of it is being spent managing relationship drama, there is little left for his work, his goals, or even his own peace of mind. Instead of returning home to a sense of calm and support, many men find that their relationships demand more energy than they restore. Arguments, misunderstandings, mood swings, and constant reassurance become a pattern, and the relationship feels less like a place of rest and more like a battlefield where he must always be alert and ready to manage the next storm. Slowly, his ability to think clearly and act with confidence begins to fade because his mind is always occupied with someone else's emotions. The hidden cost of this energy drain is that it steals a man's passion for life. His creativity declines because his mental space is filled with overthinking. His motivation drops because he is emotionally exhausted before the day even begins. His social energy decreases, leaving him less interested in friends, hobbies, or networking opportunities. All of this begins to isolate him, making him feel trapped in a cycle where the only thing he invests in is the relationship, while everything else fades into the background. The more he gives, the less of himself remains, until he starts to feel like he is no longer the man he once was. What makes this worse is the lack of recognition for the emotional effort he provides. While his partner may demand more support, more attention, and more validation, she rarely acknowledges the toll it takes on him to constantly be the emotional anchor. Instead of being seen as an act of love, his energy becomes expected, and he starts to feel invisible in his own sacrifices. This creates resentment deep inside him, but since he fears losing her or being seen as weak, he stays silent. That silence slowly turns into internal frustration, and that frustration turns into emotional exhaustion so heavy that even when he is alone, he struggles to find peace within himself. Number 4, lost focus on personal growth. One of the greatest costs a man pays in a draining relationship is the loss of his focus on personal growth. At the start, he may believe that the relationship will add balance and support to his life, but slowly it begins to consume the very energy and attention that should be directed toward building his future. Instead of using his time to develop skills, pursue opportunities, or take care of his health, he finds himself caught in endless cycles of arguments, explanations, and efforts to keep her satisfied. Every goal that once excited him begins to take a back seat, and he convinces himself that there will be time later to catch up, not realizing that the longer he delays, the further he drifts from the man he set out to become. Growth requires clarity, consistency, and discipline. It demands that a man stay focused on his mission, whether it's advancing in his career, building a business, mastering his craft, or improving his physical and mental strength. But when the majority of his focus is directed toward managing a relationship, his growth stagnates. The mental energy that should go into strategy, planning, and execution is instead wasted on overthinking text replies, managing insecurities, and finding ways to keep temporary peace. The emotional ups and downs of the relationship scatter his attention, and he struggles to maintain the consistency required to move forward. Without realizing it, he starts losing momentum, and once momentum is gone, it becomes extremely difficult to rebuild. Over time, this neglect of personal growth creates a dangerous imbalance. A man who was once driven, motivated, and ambitious begins to feel stuck. His dreams feel distant, his goals feel unrealistic, and he begins to accept mediocrity as his reality. The saddest part is that many men don't even notice this shift happening because the relationship occupies their thoughts so completely that they normalize the lack of progress. They stop pushing themselves to learn, to create, to improve, and instead live in a state of constant reaction to whatever the relationship demands. The fire inside them that once fueled their ambitions starts to dim, replaced by exhaustion and resignation. The loss of growth doesn't just affect the man, it affects how he is perceived in the relationship as well. Ironically, the very effort he puts into pleasing her can lead to her losing respect for him. Women are naturally drawn to men who are focused, ambitious, and moving forward in life. When she senses that he is neglecting his purpose to revolve around her, she may unconsciously start to see him as less attractive, less inspiring, and less valuable. The man sacrifices his dreams to hold on to her, yet in doing so, he loses the very qualities that made her admire him in the first place. This creates a cruel paradox where the more he invests in the relationship at the expense of his growth, the more likely he is to lose both, his personal future and the respect of his partner. Number 5, stress and mental load. Stress is one of the heaviest prices a man pays when a relationship becomes draining. Instead of being a source of peace and balance, the relationship turns into a constant mental weight that follows him everywhere. He may be at work, in the gym, or even trying to relax, yet in the back of his mind, he is carrying the tension of unresolved arguments, the fear of disappointing her, or the worry about what she might be thinking. The relationship becomes a second job, one without breaks, without weekends, and without rewards. This kind of pressure slowly chips away at his mental clarity, leaving him restless, anxious, and unable to fully focus on anything else. A man under constant relationship stress finds his thoughts looping endlessly around the same concerns. He replays arguments in his head, wonders if he should have said something differently, checks his phone obsessively for her messages, or tries to predict her mood before he even sees her. This constant overthinking drains his ability to be present in his own life. The mental energy he should be dedicating to solving real problems and advancing his goals is wasted on decoding emotions, managing expectations, and putting out small fires that keep reigniting. The relationship becomes a mental maze that he cannot escape, and no matter how much effort he puts in, he feels like he is always one step behind. The impact of this stress does not remain confined to his thoughts. It spills into every area of his life. His work suffers because he cannot give his full attention. His health suffers because stress weakens the body, leading to fatigue, insomnia, and even physical illness. His relationships with friends and family suffer because he withdraws, too mentally drained to engage or enjoy their company. Slowly, the relationship consumes all of his mental space until he becomes a shadow of himself, carrying a constant heaviness that others may not see, but he feels every single day. What was supposed to be a partnership begins to feel like a burden strapped to his back, making every step forward in life harder than it should be. What makes this mental load even more destructive is the lack of relief. A healthy relationship should act as a safe place where a man can lay down his stress and recharge. But when the relationship itself is the source of the stress, there is no place to rest. Even moments that should bring joy, like going out together, sharing a meal, or spending a quiet evening, become filled with tension because he is always cautious, always aware of the possibility of conflict, always thinking about what he needs to do to keep things stable. This constant state of alertness creates burnout, where his mind never gets to experience peace. Over time, the weight of this invisible mental load wears him down so deeply that he may stop feeling like himself altogether, as though his identity has been buried beneath the stress of simply trying to maintain the relationship. Number 6, dependency trap. One of the most dangerous effects of a draining relationship is the way it traps a man into dependency. At the beginning, the connection feels exciting and fulfilling, and he tells himself that this bond adds meaning to his life. But slowly, without even realizing it, he begins to rely on the relationship for his happiness, his sense of self-worth, and even his identity. Instead of being whole on his own, he starts believing he needs her presence, her validation, or her affection to feel complete. This dependency is subtle at first, hidden under the idea of love or commitment, but over time it becomes a prison where his strength, independence, and individuality are locked away. The problem with this dependency is that it shifts the balance of power. A man who once stood tall and confident becomes emotionally fragile because he cannot imagine life without her. He starts tolerating disrespect, overlooking red flags, and compromising on his values just to keep the relationship intact. The fear of losing her becomes stronger than his own self-respect, and every decision he makes is filtered through the question of whether it will keep her happy. This is how manipulation often creeps in, not always intentional, but made possible by the fact that he has handed over control of his emotions to another person. Instead of living with freedom, he becomes a prisoner of her approval. Over time, this dependency weakens him at the core. A man who should be growing stronger, more disciplined, and more focused on his mission ends up shrinking into someone who cannot function without constant reassurance. His happiness rises and falls based on her attention, her moods, or her actions. If she is distant, he feels broken. If she is warm, he feels alive again. This emotional roller coaster takes away his stability, and he begins to forget what it feels like to stand steady on his own 2 feet. He becomes addicted to the highs of affection and terrified of the lows of disconnection, which leaves him stuck in a cycle that drains his spirit. What makes the dependency trap even more dangerous is that it blinds a man to the bigger picture. He convinces himself that the sacrifices he makes are worth it because he believes he cannot find happiness without her. He stops pursuing opportunities, stops prioritizing his goals, and even stops maintaining his friendships because his entire world begins to revolve around the relationship. This isolation makes him even more dependent, because now he has no outside support system to remind him of his worth. He becomes emotionally cornered, unable to walk away even when he knows the relationship is harming him. The relationship becomes less about love and more about survival, and he clings to it not because it is healthy, but because he fears he will collapse without it. So understand this: your time, your money, your energy, and your peace of mind are not things to be wasted. They are the foundation of who you are as a man, and once drained, they are very hard to rebuild. A relationship is meant to add value to your life, not strip it away. If you ever find yourself constantly giving while losing yourself in the process, it is not love, it is sacrifice without return. Protect your focus, guard your energy, and never allow anyone to make you dependent on them for your sense of worth. Because the moment you reclaim control over your life, you'll realize that your growth, your purpose, and your peace are far more powerful than any relationship that drains you.